appreciate that. Okay, so today we are going to go through some notes. We're going to finish water, and we're going to try to get as far as we can on carbon. So we'll go right up to the bell, just doing notes, which is a little bit of a drag. I have scheduled probably Tuesday and Wednesday next week to just be group time, where you're going to be doing an activity with some group mates, and you will not have to listen to me lecture. Sometimes I will flip our classrooms so that you'll do activities in class, and I'll give the notes at night, like a video that you watch, so that you don't always have to just sit here and waste the time when you could be getting to know your peers and getting help from your peers or from me. Tomorrow we do have a lab. I have a lab that you're going to do at home by yourselves. All you need is a penny, or I guess you could use a quarter or a nickel or a dime, but it's designed to be a penny, and some water, and then anything often. Give me a second, Avery. So anything that you could add to the water. So like you could add some salts to the water, or sugar, or oil, or whatever you happen to have sitting around the house. You could add to the water, and basically you're going to look at how much water, how many drops of water does the penny hold when it's just water, and how many drops of water does the penny hold when you've added things. Very much a low-level experiment. However, then we're going to do some statistics on it. For AP Biology, you need to know how to do standard deviation and standard error of the mean. So we're going to practice that. That was from back at your Stroop lab. And then you're going to make graphs with error bars. I did post a video that just kind of reminded you how to do some of that and how to do the lab. I think the video is like 12 minutes long or something, just to give you a little help. So that's tomorrow. There is also homework over the weekend. And yeah, so Avery's question, how often do we do these active reading guides? That's hard to say. So you have, I'll tell you what's due. You have this one that you did last night, and then you have one that's on chapter 3. And the one that's on chapter 3 is 10 pages. And it'll be spread out over several days. But then that's it for your reading for this unit. And then our test will be Monday after next. So it gets spread out over days, but that's going to be over the next, several days. You'll be doing those active reading guides, and you can plug away at them, as you have time. The chapter 3 study guide won't be due until next week later. So plug away at it. Don't waste time this weekend. Just reminding you, we're saying this in advisory also, but this class is normally a 90-minute class. And then we would typically have anywhere, it totally depends on the day. So one day we might have 30 minutes of homework. Another day we might have 2 hours of homework. So, just giving yourself a sense of, how much it takes, how long it takes, that kind of thing. So just kind of giving yourself a sense of where you're at. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and give some notes right now. I really recommend that you write, and you write fast, that you have something, a notebook where you're taking notes, and that you're writing things down quickly. I would suggest that you have good titles on your notes. So like right now, I'm going to be talking about water, and then we're going to switch and we're going to talk about carbon at the end. First block, I did not finish the notes, which is a little disappointing. So I'm going to have to figure out a way to get you to finish those notes. So yeah, so we're just going to jump in and go for it, and interrupt me if you have questions, okay? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click on, these are the same notes that we had yesterday. Oop, I closed them out. That was dumb.
Are you presenting?
Oops, thank you. It's supposed to be. I see your little smug grins. Uh-oh. For some reason, Siri clicked on. I don't need you,
didn't
Siri.
get that.
I don't need you, Siri. Thank you. Nobody knows. Siri just popped up. All right. So am I presenting now? It didn't work. There we go. All right, can you see what I'm doing? And I'm recording. I think we're all good. I think somebody posted a question in the chat and I could not see it. Can somebody tell me the question? Avery, was that you maybe?
Chloe asked, do we have to write down all the functional groups?
You will write down all the functional groups. Yes, we may not get to that today, but yes, you will be writing down all the functional groups. So there will be 7 functional groups that you will need to know. They will be super helpful as you're doing your activities next week. So yes, you will write all those down, but not yet. All right, I forgot how far we got, you guys. We got through this slide, right? Can somebody tell me where we ended yesterday? Did we talk about adhesion and cohesion?
On the last thing we did.
Sorry.
Oh, you can go.
We were just finishing with the cohesion and adhesion. I don't think we were on this slide.
Okay, so thank you both very, very much for helping me out. I appreciate that. So just a quick review of yesterday. Water is incredibly important to life on this planet. We think a planet that does not have ice, liquid water, and water vapor will not support life. So its position for its sun is super important, blah, blah, blah. On top of it, Earth only has about 3% fresh water of all of its water. So our fresh water is super, super precious, and we need to take good care of that water. We talked about water's unique properties, and this was from chemistry class. It's a bent polar molecule, so it's capable of making hydrogen bonds. And hopefully you drew this diagram showing a hydrogen ion with a slightly positive charge, attracted to the oxygen of another water molecule that has a slightly negative charge. That is what leads to all of the properties about water that we're going to talk about today. So the first one we talked about, cohesion, is water being attracted to itself. Now, other molecules can experience cohesion, but we're just talking about water right now. So when I say water molecules are attracted to each other, that's cohesion, I'm just talking about water. Okay, adhesion is when water molecules are attracted to other molecules, and those other molecules are always either ionic, so they have a full-on plus or minus charge, or they are also polar, so that they have a slight plus or minus charge, and water is attracted to them. What is water not attracted to? Anything that's nonpolar. Surface tension, which is what your lab is going to be about, and adjusting variables to see if you can affect surface tension, is due to the hydrogen bonds and water attract. Is somebody have their microphone on? Should I find out who it is? Got it? Okay, good. So surface tension is due to the hydrogen bonds forming between water, and that's what allows all kinds of things to happen. But one of the things is it allows little bugs to crawl around or leaves to float on the water. Your assignment that was assigned yesterday and is due tomorrow morning is to be able to explain, not in paragraph form. If you want to write a paragraph, oh my gosh, be my guest, but I don't need to grade it in a picky manner. I want you to be able to explain to me how water travels from the roots to the needles of a giant tree. Imagine a redwood that's 37 stories tall. It's evaporating 500 gallons of water at a time. I once heard, although I couldn't verify this, I once heard that a redwood tree has as much water in it as like an Olympic swimming pool. And it's lifting that water up, but it doesn't have a heart or muscles. So how is that happening? So you would explain that to me with bullet points and diagrams and arrows, and you don't need to write paragraphs. If that's just, you have to write paragraphs, fine, but I'm not going to grade it like it's an essay. I'm looking for you to make a diagram and a model and to show me arrows and your ideas about how it's happening. So just a quick information about a vocabulary word, and well, okay, I'll start with transpiration. Transpiration, I often tell my lower level students, is like plant sweat. It is the evaporation of water from plants, and plants sweat a lot. In fact, we have discovered that rainforests, part of why they're so rainy is because the plants, it's a chicken egg kind of thing, the plants are transpiring so much water that you produce high levels of humidity over the rainforest, and then it rains. If you cut down the trees, the humidity and the rain diminish. What a depressing thought, you guys. So then how do you replant the forest if you just affected the integral weather patterns that allow the forest to be there in the first place? Two other words that I'm not going to go over, you're going to need to research on your own, are the cells that allow water and sugar to move through a plant. They're like vessels, like blood vessels, and they're called xylem and phloem. And you just need to research that. I'll take you 1 second on the internet and figure that out. And then you tell us how water is moving up, because it's a crazy, crazy thing. All right, whoops, I forgot about that. This is what I don't like about prezzies. They make us all dizzy. All right, next, I'm going to talk about specific heat. And the fact that water has really high specific heat. So specific heat is basically how much energy it takes, it absorbs, a substance absorbs before the temperature changes. So you don't know about specific heat yet. That will be in our 4th term of honors chemistry. We'll learn more about specific heat. But if you look at the numbers where it says water, ethanol, and iron, notice water's is crazy high. What that means is that it can absorb an enormous amount of heat before it evaporates, before it gets warm enough to let water start evaporating. So water is super unique. The reason that matters for life on this planet, well, there's many reasons, but I'll give you one reason. Because our planet is covered with so much water, and water can absorb so much heat, we experience a very stable climate over the whole planet. Now, it might not seem that stable to us, but compared to other planets, our temperature swings are very minimal. We have a very constant temperature, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that our oceans can absorb heat without the temperature increasing greatly. And likewise, they can release heat without them freezing right away. So that helps moderate temperatures over the entire planet. Super important. So a couple of things I want you to understand. Whoops, don't want to bump it. A couple of things I want you to understand about heat and evaporation and freezing. It all has to do with kinetic energy. And you probably remember kinetic energy from junior high. Kinetic energy is the energy of motion, the motion of the molecules. And I'm going to say some things that you may or may not have had in junior high, and they're definitely not right here. So you might want to be writing fast. You can always come back to these. You can't always come back. I guess you could listen to the recording again if you want to come back to my words. But I would like you to write down temperature equals how fast molecules are moving. That's all temperature is. Temperature equals how fast molecules are moving. And then in parentheses, write their kinetic energy. So I want to explain really quickly how a thermometer works, which you may or may not have ever been told, but let's imagine a thermometer that has red, it's just a red coloring, and alcohol in it. As that thermometer absorbs energy, let's say you put the thermometer in a pot of boiling water, it starts absorbing the energy from its environment, and that energy is absorbed by the alcohol, and the molecules start moving faster. But because they're trapped in that glass tube, they can't expand this way, so they expand this direction. So when it gets warmer, it looks like the amount of alcohol is increasing when we see that red line go up and up and up, and it looks like it's decreasing when it's cooling. All we've done is figured out how to measure how fast those molecules are moving. So scientists, Fahrenheit and Celsius, they figured out how to add little gradations on those thermometers. And we said that when water is boiling, that the kinetic energy is this, but when water is frozen, the kinetic energy is this. And we put those little gradations on the thermometer, and now we say, oh, it's 50 degrees, oh, it's 100 degrees, oh, it's 0 degrees. But all we're measuring is how fast molecules are moving. Okay, so here's my point. Water has these hydrogen bonds. Every single thing we're going to talk about water has to do with their hydrogen bonds. Water has hydrogen bonds. So that makes them attracted to one another. So as you increase energy, they want to move like the alcohol does, but they don't move as much as the alcohol does because they're attached to each other. So they still move and their energy increases, but more slowly. We don't see as much random motion in water until the energy level has really, really, really increased. So that's part of why water has such high specific heat. So then there are other things that tie into that exact same idea. Evaporative cooling. This is a weird photo. I did not put this weird photo in. So evaporative cooling is the idea that when we sweat or when we sit in an ocean and let the water evaporate off of us, we cool down. Well, why is that happening? You don't need to know this, but I just want you to get the idea that right now on that guy's skin, the water molecules have a certain kinetic energy. And as the water molecules absorb more energy, they start to break away. And that's what evaporation is. So as they are breaking away from his skin, that particular water molecule has a lot of kinetic energy, and that's why it was able to break away. It absorbed enough energy to break the hydrogen bonds and to escape from the water that's on his skin. So what that does is it lowers the average kinetic energy of the water that's still on his skin. His skin senses the lower energy as coolness. So every time that a water molecule leaves his skin, he feels cooler because the average kinetic energy is less. So that's super important for sweating and for organisms that are maintaining their body temperatures. In addition, we have to talk about ice and why ice floats and how that has anything to do with kinetic energy. So in liquid water, the molecules are moving and they form hydrogen bonds, but because they're moving, the hydrogen bonds are constantly forming and then breaking. The molecules are moving like this and they make the hydrogen bonds. Look at the diagram. They make hydrogen bonds, but then they break them in a split second. When you belly flop on the water, you hit the water hard and you hit all of those hydrogen bonds and it's like somebody slapped you and you're like, oh, but then all of the hydrogen bonds break and then you float in the water and you're like, why did that hurt so much? It hurt because you hit all of the hydrogen bonds at the same time, but then they broke. So that's liquid water. As we remove energy from water, so as the kinetic energy starts to go down, those bonds that are normally breaking and forming and breaking and forming, they start forming more often than they're breaking. So the hydrogen bonds start to become a little bit stronger and a little bit more solid. That's a bad word, but a little bit more, do they have a good word for it on here? Yeah, they don't have a good word for it on here, but just stable. That's the word. There we go. The hydrogen bonds become more stable. That's the word I'm looking for. And once we have removed enough kinetic energy that the water molecules are no longer breaking their hydrogen bonds, those hydrogen bonds actually have a certain distance to them, and that causes ice to be bigger than the same volume of water in the liquid form. And so it's those hydrogen bonds that causes ice to be less dense than water. Water's like this, and it's constantly making and breaking those hydrogen bonds. But as the water molecules start to slow down, some of those hydrogen bonds become stable, and they have a distance to them. And that is what allows ice to float, is because it's less dense. Okay, so that was a whole long explanation about why ice floats. Who cares that ice floats? I'm going to say this repeatedly. This is why this is a reason that life can exist on this planet, because we have water. Ice floats. It does two things. Number one, it protects the water down below. So it prevents heat loss from the water down below. It acts like an insulating layer and doesn't allow the heat in that water to escape. So organisms that live in oceans can survive even if there is ice floating on the top. Organisms that live in Minnesota lakes, can survive in the bottom of the lake, even when there's a layer of ice on the top. In addition, if that ice sank, which most solids so if something can go between a solid, a liquid, and a gas, the solid is more dense and it would sink. So if ice sank like other solids do, that would push the liquid water on top. It would allow the kinetic energy, it would allow the heat to escape, the kinetic energy would drop, and more ice would form. All those living organisms would be pushed up to the top, and eventually the top water would freeze, and all life in that water body dies. And so the fact that ice floats, it prevents them from solidifying top to bottom. It prevents our bodies of water from solidifying from top to bottom, which allows fish and coral reefs and all kinds of microscopic organisms that we don't appreciate at all that live down there, and allows them to survive. Oh, shoot. Okay, how'd we do? We're going to keep going. Water is a great solvent. It is often called the universal solvent. There's really no such thing, but the reason it's called the universal solvent is because it can dissolve so many things. Well, why can it dissolve so many things? Because it's a polar molecule. It can dissolve things that are ionic, that have full charges like salt, and please look at the diagram carefully. It can also dissolve things that are polar. The one thing that it cannot dissolve, and we've repeated this already several times, is anything that's nonpolar. So oil, for example, it cannot dissolve because it is not attracted to water, to oil. Take a look at the dissolving here of a salt crystal. So it's a big green and yellow salt crystal on the side. How is it coming apart? And we saw this already in another presentation in chemistry, but just reminding you, please look carefully. I'm going to see if I can increase it. Look carefully at the diagram. Notice that the slightly positive charge on the hydrogens are, those hydrogens are close to the negatively charged chlorine. But look at the positively charged sodium. Notice that the water molecules have turned around. And now the oxygens, which have a slight negative charge, they butt up against the positive cation. And so that's why their polarity matters. It's going to be attracted. The negative part of the molecule is going to be attracted to anions, and the positive part of the water molecule is going to be attracted. Oop, I said that backwards. The negative part is going to be attracted to cations, and the positively charged parts of the molecule, water molecule, are going to be attracted to anions. All right, moving on. This is a hard one. So water dissociates. While I'm talking, would you, in your notes, either draw this diagram or write it? So you could say water plus water, H2O plus H2O, and then show an arrow that goes both directions, makes, and then this is written H3O with a plus next to it. It's usually in brackets, H3O plus, and then plus, and then OH, and it's usually written OH. Sorry, the plus is on the inside, not on the outside. And then OH with a minus on the inside. Okay, put it in brackets. I will tell you a little background information. You are going to have an entire unit on acids and bases in chemistry. You read a little bit, I think that was last night, in your reading last night, about pH. You get one slide on pH, and you have to understand that this is an entire unit. So I'm going to try to give you the basic information that you need to know for the AP exam, but just be aware that you might have questions, and those will be answered later in the semester or later in the year. Okay, so water, H2O plus H2O. Water, because it's a polar molecule and it's attracted to itself, sometimes the hydrogens pop off and go and sit next to the negatively charged oxygen ion or oxygen atom. And what that does is when that hydrogen pops off and attaches to water, it makes an H3O plus ion, and the water ion, that is the water molecule that's missing a hydrogen, is called a hydroxide ion, an OH. So this is called hydronium, and this one's called hydroxide. In any given glass of water, we know quite precisely what percent of water molecules are going to have broken up into hydronium and hydroxide ions. And there's a whole math we're not going to go into that leads to what's called the pH scale. And the pH scale, my dog might start barking, sorry. The pH scale runs from 0 to 14. 7 is considered neutral. 7 is, it indicates how many hydronium and hydroxide ions there are in water. That's what 7 is. Now, to make something an acid, we add more hydrogens. Remember that I said that the hydrogen pops off one of these water molecules and swings over to the other water molecule, and that's what it does here. Well, what if we actually threw a whole bunch of H's into this glass of water? What if I just threw a whole bunch of H's? Well, they're going to start sitting on the water molecules, and we're going to have more and more hydronium ions. So that's called an acid if it donates hydrogens. So now down below it says acids donate protons. KJ, I don't understand. There are 3 terms that they're going to use in this very slide that are almost synonyms. The first word is hydrogen ion. A hydrogen ion, remember, hydrogen is just 1 proton and 1 electron. That's all it is. But if you steal that electron away, all you're left with is 1 proton. So you could write it H plus, that's the hydrogen ion, or you could just say it's a proton, because that's all that it is. It doesn't have an electron. Or when it touches water, click, it clicks right here, and you could say it's a hydronium ion, because it would immediately attach to a water molecule, and now it becomes, so those are like 3 terms that they use sort of synonymously. They're not exactly the same, but so what I said was that an acid donates hydrogen ions. That is the same as saying an acid donates protons. And when those protons get donated, the number of hydronium ions increases. Now, just stay with me for a second. So an example, and I'd like you to write this down, an example is hydrochloric acid. So I want you to write HCl, and then draw the 2 arrows going, because they can go both directions. So draw those 2 arrows. And then I want you to write H plus, so show me a hydrogen ion, plus a Cl minus. So you have HCl can break into H plus Cl minus, just like salt can break into Na plus Cl minus. This can break into H plus Cl minus. All right, so if I add, it's called hydrochloric acid. Don't do this. If I add hydrochloric acid to my glass of water, I have just greatly increased the number of hydrogen ions. Do you see them on your paper? Do you see that you added H pluses? So those H pluses just added to my water, and now I have an acid. That increases, watch my thumbs for a second, that increases the number of hydrogens, or if I were going to say it differently, protons, or hydronium ions. It increases. The pH scale, watch my thumbs, is an inverse scale. So that means it lowers the pH. There's a reason it's inverse. The math is not hard, but we just haven't learned it, okay? So the more hydrogen ions I have, the lower my pH is. Vice versa, a base is anything that can steal those hydrogen ions away. So I want you to write down something underneath. So you had your HCl equation. Now I want you to write sodium hydroxide, NaOH. So Na and then big O and big H. So sodium hydroxide. And I want you to show those 2 arrows, and I want you to break it into Na plus, and then the OH stays together. It's an ion. It's one of our common ions. So that's hydroxide with a minus. So now here's what crazy thing happens when you add a base in. That OH minus, do you see that you wrote OH minus? That OH minus accepts some of the protons. So if there's a random proton floating around, the OH from the sodium hydroxide is going to suck it up. And what happens if you add an H to an OH? What happens if you add an H to an OH? You get water. right? So if you combine hydrochloric acid and sodium hydroxide, look at the ions that you wrote, H plus Cl minus and Na plus OH minus. If you combine your ions, the H and the OH, you get water. And what other thing do you get? You should recognize it. Somebody shout it out. What
Salt.
else? Yes, you get salt water. Crazy, right? Okay, so bases accept hydrogens and they lower the number of hydrogens. So watch my thumbs, cuties. The number of hydrogens or the number of protons or the number of hydronium ions goes down. And since pH is an inverse scale, we say the pH went up. So if I dump hydrochloric acid in my water, the pH might now, instead of being pH 7, it might now be a pH 2 because it has lots of hydrogen ions. If instead I add sodium hydroxide, now the pH might be a pH 12 because it doesn't have very many hydrogen ions anymore. All right, you do not need to be able to calculate pH, even though it says you should be able to. We'll learn that a little bit later in the year. I am going to move on. How are we doing time-wise? No, we got 10 more minutes, right? Avery, I'm having the same problem you have. We got 10 more minutes. We're doing okay. We're not going to get as far as I wanted, but we're going to do okay. The next thing that I'm going to spend more time on than I really should, but this is so important to life on this planet, and it will come up in our ecology unit, and I'm just introducing it to you now. I really want you to take a look at why pH matters, especially in biological systems. I'm trying to center this. There we go. So the biggest issue about pH has to do with our oceans. So you all know that increasing levels of carbon dioxide are causing global warming. And we're going to learn about how that mechanism works a little bit later. But what a lot of people don't understand is that carbon dioxide is also damaging our oceans in an incredibly crazy, destructive way. Every time that we burn fossil fuels or we add carbon dioxide into the air, you power up your computer, you're adding carbon dioxide, unless your computer is being powered by solar, wind, that kind of thing, you're adding less carbon dioxide. The manufacturing process might have increased carbon dioxide. Okay, on a tangent here. Anytime that you burn a fossil fuel, you're adding carbon dioxide to the air. Every time the wind blows over a body of water, every time there's a wave, every time there's a stirring of the water, some of that carbon dioxide gets incorporated into the water. It is as though I were blowing bubbles with a straw. Now, when I exhale out, I make carbon dioxide. So if I blow bubbles into a straw, I increase the carbon dioxide level in here, and I actually make my water more acidic. So it's happening all the time, all over our oceans. Hurricanes make it worse because there's more wind and there's more waves. Okay, so we're adding carbon dioxide into the ocean's water. I would like you to write down this equation because I think this is just a fascinating and terrifying equation. Carbon dioxide plus water, so we're talking about the ocean's water, maybe even label it ocean water. It's any water. It could be the water in Lake Minnetonka, who cares? But I'm most concerned about our oceans. Okay, makes, and then I want you to write down H2CO3, and in parentheses, I want you to write carbonic acid. It makes an acid, you guys. And we could go through, and I would love to go through the chemistry of what's going on here, but I will just tell you why an acid in this environment is so bad. Coral reefs and all organisms that produce shells and bony structures on the outside, they use a molecule called calcium carbonate. Carbonic acid removes their ability to produce calcium carbonate. So they can no longer make their shells. Their shells become transparent and fragile, and then eventually they can't make their shells. And the coral reefs can no longer build the skeleton for the coral reef, which is the foundation of the entire tropical water ecosystem. And so carbon dioxide, yes, it causes global warming, and yes, that's bad, but it's also acidifying our oceans and then damaging our coral reefs and the foundations of that entire ecosystem that is underwater. Okay, if that doesn't depress you, it depresses me. I'm sorry that I depressed you. So moving on, we are now going to talk about, so that was the whole water section. Sorry, I'm going fast. You definitely can look at those questions. Those are good questions to kind of think through. We're going to jump ahead and talk about carbon right now. And I'm going to watch my time. I have about 5 minutes. You guys do have a homework assignment. So it's a reading assignment, and there's an activity that's practicing some of the biochemistry stuff. Okay, so all life on this planet, you know that, is carbon-based. And I've been saying, you know, we think when we need a planet, if we're going to find another planet that has life on it, it probably has to have lots of carbon. I've already taught you this. Carbon forms 4 covalent bonds. That's called tetravalent. The only other molecule that is similar is silicon, and even then it is not as powerful. Its nucleus does not draw its electrons in as well, so it is less stable. So when it forms its 4 bonds, it's less stable. So we just think that silicon is not a replacement for carbon. So carbon allows, its 4 bonds allows to an enormous variability in the molecules that carbon can form, and they can be very stable because of those carbon bonds. All right, so I'm just going to introduce you to this really quickly. I am not a huge fan of this particular experiment. It's a fascinating experiment, but this author of this presentation implies that we have figured out where life came from. It is an incredible mystery, ladies and gentlemen. We understand evolution, sort of, but we have no acceptable answer about where the first cell comes from. There are very reputable scientists who think that the first cell had to have been planted here because coming up with the incredible complexity that there is in a cell seems so incredibly unlikely. It's an area of great research right now. So just saying, we have no idea where life comes from. This experiment is a very interesting experiment. It was done by Stanley Miller and somebody, Urey, I forgot his first name. And I think it was done in the 1950s. And basically what they did, their hypothesis was, could we create conditions that were on Earth way back before there was any life on Earth, so primordial Earth? Could we create those conditions and then see what chemicals start to form? So they added heat. They thought that there would be no atmosphere, so there'd be a lot of sunlight. And they added electricity, imagining that there would be, so there was some sunlight, I guess. They were imagining electricity from lightning. I don't remember exactly the details of how they did it. But anyway, in their experiment, they just put a bunch of chemicals, random chemicals, in some water. They heated it, they zapped it with electricity, and then they collected what formed at the end of the experiment. And what they discovered almost immediately was that amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins, and hydrocarbons started forming randomly. Nobody had to plan it. It just happened. And so then some people go, oh, well, there you go. Life is just random and it just happened. Oh my gosh, is that ever completely false? A protein is hundreds or thousands of very specific amino acids put together in this very specific order. And if you put them in the wrong order, the protein doesn't function. That has nothing to do with DNA. Like, we haven't even begun to talk about DNA. It's so much more incredibly complicated. But they are making an interesting point that some of these molecules do form randomly, but we don't know where that first cell comes from. That's something that is an utter mystery to biology right now. All right, how am I doing? I'm watching my time. Just a couple comments about isomers. We saw isomers in our model building lab on that MolView website. Isomers are basically molecules that have the same number of carbons, hydrogens, oxygens, but they maybe have branches in different places. So that's an isomer. They have the same formula, but structurally they're different. You don't need to know anything more. That's right here. This is where you want to know a little bit more. There are structural isomers, which are just what we just said, the same formula, but a different order. There are also, this is a type of isomer, cis-trans isomers. And yes, this is where the terms cisgender and transgender come from. So it's basically that they've been arranged in a different way around a double bond. Single bonds can rotate. Double bonds are fixed. So when you get the, look at letter B, when you get like those two X atoms and they are fixed above, that is actually a different molecule than if it is fixed, if one of them is fixed down below. And those are called cis-trans. They're still the same formula, but they have, they're different around that double bond. And then the last type of isomer is called, and I always have trouble saying it, an enantiomer. And enantiomers are mirror images of each other. So my hands are mirror images of each other. What is super interesting, I'm just going to wrap up with this. What's super interesting about enantiomers is that there are different varieties of lots of molecules on our planet. But it turns out, for example, all cells only use one type of sugar. Well, why don't they use the other type of sugar? The implication is that all cells have descended from one kind of cell that used that one type of sugar, and everybody else just followed suit because they're all related to that original set of cells that populated our planet. So what I'll throw out there just because it's cool, there was a scientist that invented the opposite sugar, so the enantiomer sugar, and discovered that it tastes exactly the same as regular sugar and that you can put it in cookies, but your body cannot process it, so you get 0 calories. Wow, that's amazing. However, it costs bajillions to produce, and they've never found a way to produce it that would be inexpensive. So it will never replace sugar on our planet until somebody figures out, maybe that'll be you, how to produce it, mass produce it in inexpensive ways. All right, cuties, I am done. We did not get anywhere near through carbon, so I'm going to have to figure out how to get you talking about carbon and learning about carbon. You have a lab to do tomorrow and a reading and a packet to work on. I'll extend some of the due dates because we didn't get as far as I was hoping we would today. So hang in there. Let me know if you have questions. Peace. Let me know if you have questions.
Hey, KJ.
Yes.
Is there a place we can like find these notes to look at them?
Yes, it's linked on my page today.
Okay.